Now, I went Jaylen Brown. You know me and the whole hat-on forwards. I like dependability. So I don't think Jaylen Brown is as skilled as Kyrie, but I know what I get. I know what I get. Toughness, physicality, wing defender, same guy. Anything in that top 10 that bothered you?
No, so if I can see the whole thing again, I think Drew Holiday is, I think that's more based on his history. You had him 10th, right? They're not. Yeah. I'm not seeing it right now, but he has not been up to that level in these playoffs. But his history of being a champion and being a leader, I think, earns his spot on the list. I have no problem with your top 5 at all. I think having Luka number 1 is smart and correct. Ant number 2 and Tatum 3. I think that has to be the 1 through 3. People could argue that Halliburton, based on what he was, as certainly in the beginning of the regular season, should be higher, and he came on strong at the end of the second round. And so credit to him. I do want to say something about Kyrie, though, Colin.
Yeah.
Because I have been so impressed by Kyrie Irving all year. Kyrie seems to have matured in a way in his early 30s that is, in my experience, rare. I think guys usually, mature a lot in their mid to late 20s, but who they are at 30 is kind of who they're going to be. And Kyrie Irving taking on a totally new role with this team, taking a step back offensively, committing himself defensively in a way he never has, clearly trying to be the elder statesman leader, and this is crazy, but it's true, of all the stars in the playoffs, he's the oldest left by far, and was the oldest left after round 1 ended, at the guy who's 31, 32 years old. And I think Kyrie is the best version of himself that we have seen outside of Cleveland.
Yeah.
And I also think he has been strategic in understanding he has not been on a deep playoff run in 7 years. He has suffered some injuries since then, and I think he's tried to kind of throttle his intensity and effort to second halves of games, trying to make sure he has something left in the tank. He's one of the major reasons, alongside Luka, obviously, that I think the Mavs can win the whole thing.
So I grew up, as you know, I'm a bit older. In the 70s is when I fell in love with the NBA, and there were a lot of very good teams. The Sixers had a Dr. J and a George McGinnis and a Mo Cheeks and Andrew Toney, if I recall, and Steve Mix. And then you had the Sonics with Gus and DJ, and the Blazers had Walton, and the Warriors had Rick Barry and Elvin Hayes and Unseld with Washington. A bunch of very good teams, no great ones. And then it's just dynasties up until about 6 years ago. And after watching Denver and Minnesota, I'm like, well, I thought Denver could be San Antonio, and they're not probably going to be. I didn't really criticize Denver for losing. My takeaway was, well, Minnesota, the same guy that built Denver, helped build Minnesota. They built him to beat Denver.
That's right.
And I just felt like no criticism of Denver. It's just these are all, including the Celtics, very good teams, no great teams. Fair?
So I think that's fair. I think that is a little bit of a criticism in that Denver was being discussed as a potential dynasty, as a not very good team, but a great team. And the way in which they lost has to matter.
Yeah.
They were up 3-2 in a series against a team full of guys. Every single guy that played in Minnesota, except for Mike Conley, this was the biggest games of their lives, and Denver is the team that blinked. Up 3-2, Denver loses by 45 points, and then in Game 6, and then in Game 7, blows a 20-point second-half lead. And I know it's become very, in vogue to say, 20-point leads in the modern NBA, what do they really mean? Well, this year in the NBA, teams that were up 20 in the second half won 96% of their games. In NBA playoff history, teams up 20 in the second half win 97% of their games. That was a collapse. And while I thought Jokic was absolutely brilliant in games 4 and 5, 2 perfect offensive performances, and I thought he was good, not necessarily great, but good in Game 7, a loss like this does stagger you as far as when you're trying to climb the ranks historically. And now Jokic was being handed player of the era. Giannis now is going to have something to say about that. Giannis, who, by the way, has been in the same number of conference finals, the same number of NBA finals, the same finals MVPs. Jokic has 3 league MVPs. Giannis has 2, but also a Defensive Player of the Year award. And Giannis's title defense ended in a round 2 7-game loss. However, that one ended with Chris Middleton missing the entirety of that round due to injury. And so I think Giannis, Jokic, and then we'll see if Luka can finish this thing off. Those 3 guys are going to be vying for league supremacy over the next few seasons, in my opinion.
All right, Boston's going to fly through the Pacers, who are an egregiously bad defensive team. It won't be very competitive. I'll take Minnesota over Dallas, but it'll go 6 or 7. I think New York not making the Eastern Conference Finals, a bit of a gut punch for ESPN. It was very obvious on the broadcast who they were pulling for. But needless to...
Oh, you could tell? I thought it was subtle. Oh, they really underplayed it.
So let me throw this. I said this yesterday, is that if you looked at the Warriors, a big part of winning pre-KD, during KD, and after KD was the culture. Spoelstra, Riley, Heat culture. Is that the Knicks, you could argue, they don't even play like anybody else. They have created a kind of a Villanova collegiate gritty culture that has such redeemable value for a franchise that couldn't get anything right for 20 years. Now, my takeaway is James Dolan was paying so much attention to the Sphere in Vegas, which is a masterpiece, that he just sort of backed off basketball. Basketball people took over, and they're running the Knicks like grown-ups. And so my takeaway is you need another star. Don't screw with the culture. It's so hard to create. Warriors have it. Heat have it. I think you could argue the Knicks culture is like 3rd, 4th, 5th in the league. So who is the perfect piece to add to this team? Because I think it's a little bit of a dilemma. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's so hard because even if they were healthy, they wouldn't have won the title. If they were healthy, I believe they would have beaten Indiana and maybe could throw a scare into the Pacers. But Jalen is a superstar, but they're still a piece away.
Yep.
And so I know this probably goes against what you're thinking, but my first phone call would be to Phoenix to try to get Kevin Durant. Because Jalen can be the leader, and the culture is built, and we have seen that if you already have it built, Durant can come in and supercharge it for you, and I think he can even do that at an advanced age. Obviously, there would be a perfect basketball fit for LeBron, but I do not think LeBron is leaving. I do think LeBron, even at age 40, would be enough to be the final piece for them, certainly in the East and maybe in the league. After those 2 guys, it gets really hard, Colin. Knicks fans want Mikal Bridges from the Nets to kind of complete that Villanova quartet. But I don't think the Knicks are a Mikal Bridges away from winning the championship. They might be a Mikal Bridges away from getting to a finals, but I don't know about winning a championship. Obviously there was the Donovan Mitchell, flirtation a couple years ago. I would not go after Donovan. I think that's redundant with Jalen Brunson.
Agreed.
And then your backcourt is way, way too small. Like, do you call Chicago for a Zach LaVine? I suppose. I don't think there is a perfect fit, Colin, other than some of our aging superstars in Kevin Durant and LeBron. I do think what the Knicks accomplished this year was they made being a Knick cool again for the first time in 20 years.
Yeah.
They showed the world that MSG is still a legitimate advantage when it's rocking, and that's a good team. And I think they reclaimed some of that Knicks brand. I do think Tibbs needs to, look at the fact that, man, what is this, 10 years in a row? My team seems a little broken down and injured at the end of the year. I wonder why. like maybe pump the brakes on that a tiny bit. But I think the Knicks had a wildly successful season, and I think Brunson's a superstar.
I want to shift to the NFL. So last year, I pick a team every year that I'm much higher on. So last year it was the Rams. Sure. I was right. Year before it was the Vikings. Got that right. And then I'll miss on occasional teams I buy. I listened to J-Mac on the Saints. Bad decision. But the team I don't get this
Way
year.
to lay that right on J-Mac's feet. I mean, that was just expert. Here are the ones I got right, and the one I got wrong that I can remember, not my fault. I love that move. It's a great call. Go ahead.
Well, the show's called The Herd. I just shovel all the bad stuff.
Exactly. Exactly. Of course. Exactly right. Go ahead.
So I said to myself, I don't get the Jets. So, yes, they have a defense that'll keep them in games, and the schedule early is pretty workable. But Nathaniel Hackett's still there, coach in the hot seat. An offensive line, old or too young. Josh Allen is still the best player in the conference. Belichick's gone, but Mike McDaniel's probably the best coach in the conference. And the last time Aaron played for a season, he had a 91 passer rating in a weaker conference. Yet DraftKings has them as a favorite in 14 of their 17 games. I think they're an 8-9 team.
I didn't know that number. All right, so listen, yeah, I didn't know that they were favored in 14 of their 17 games. That is, now I understand that some of that has to do with the fact that of where the games are.
Yeah.
But they should not be a favorite in Pittsburgh. I'm just looking at it right now. They should not be a favorite at home against Houston. Looking at that right now. I mean, like, hold on. How many times is Big Bob Saleh a road favorite? He's a favorite in Jacksonville? Give me a break. Okay, all right. I understand. You know, we don't. You talk gambling with a lot of folks, and you and I kind of moonlight with it together. But we usually have our separate kind of gambling chats, if you will. But we can make some money fading the Jets here. So let's go through the reasons.
Okay, let's do it.
They are so many of their off-season moves are operating under the assumption of, well, if we have perfect health, which it's the NFL, that is a faulty assumption to make. With that said, I understand why they took the risks they did on the offensive linemen with an injury history because they had to upgrade there. And Joe Douglas, who had one amazing draft, and aside from that has been trying to rebuild that offensive line for a half-decade and hasn't been able to do it, even though the first thing he said when he got there was he's going to remake the offensive line. So they're trying that. Okay, fine. Rodgers, the point that you're making is one that I think everyone has overlooked, which is forget the Achilles. The last season we saw him play, he was good, okay, better than average, but not great. It's not as if he was coming off his best football and then tore his Achilles. He was coming off his worst football. And then, folks, whenever I bring up Rodgers, they're like, oh, Nick, you just don't like him because of the things he says. Take my opinion of the things he says out of it. If you were talking to a guy who did your taxes and the guy was like, by the way, I've got some thoughts on Tarantia and mud floods, you'd be like, oh, I don't think I can trust you. If you went to a car dealer and the guy who was trying to sell you the EV you just leased was like, listen, let me tell you, want to argue about Dr. Fauci some? You'd be like, can I get somebody else? I don't think this guy's focused on my gas mileage. So, no, I don't know if Aaron's going to be fully locked in on everything he needs. And then you get to the coaching part of it, which is, I don't believe in quarterback wins. I do believe in coach wins because that is their record, is their coaching record. Robert Saleh's got one of the bottom 10 records of any coach to coach this many games in modern NFL history. They don't like the offensive coordinator so much. They tried to replace him in the shadows, couldn't get that done, and then it leaked that they tried to replace Hackett, and now he's still there. So do I think the Jets in the AFC are a playoff team? Of course not. Do I think they should be favored on the road against anyone but New England? No. So I'm with you on that entirely.
Don't get it. But we got into this argument yesterday, and I think you'd like this argument. I said, I think we have a graphic on this. I said, if these are the four things that you should consider when paying a quarterback, which is production, team success, and some playoff success, health. Are you healthy? And do you have leverage? Production, team success, health, and leverage. Mahomes 1, Allen 2. But by the third pick, you're like, well, Lamar and Burrow can't stay healthy. Trevor and Herbert don't win enough. Jalen's had one good year. I made the argument that I could argue Jared Goff, productive, Super Bowls, conference champion, never gets hurt, unbelievable leverage in Detroit. You could argue that Goff is third. Argue me off it, fine. But I said with Tua.
I love Goff.
I know it sounds crazy with Goff, but you start adding up all these injuries.
I got you.
Okay. And then we got to Tua, and my takeaway is 1 year ago, I was told one more concussion and he should retire by doctors. What do you do with Tua? Concussion was the whole.
You don't pay him. You don't pay him. You don't pay him. And now, listen, I think you're too high on Goff, but that's an argument for another day. Your point that his availability works in his favor, the fact that Goff, it's very clear. If you have a great offensive line, he can be quite good. The Lions have invested in the offensive line, so they're getting the best of him, so credit to them. The Tua thing, I think it's just he is an undersized player that does not have a very strong arm and some of the measurables.
Right.
And also the eye test, when you watch the games, you know he is not scary the way the actual elite quarterbacks are. He is in the best situation imaginable from a weapons perspective. He seems to truly struggle against the better teams, and if there is a light breeze, much less it being downright cold. And so here is what I will say about that, Colin. I grade Kyle Shanahan and Mike McDaniel on a bit of a curve in that I think that they get bonus points for what they have achieved without ideal quarterback situations.
Right.
With Kyle from Jimmy to Brock Purdy and for McDaniel with Tua. If the Miami Dolphins give Tua a contract extension, I then remove that curve because you are then signing up for it. You are then saying, this is the guy that I want. Like Shanahan, after a couple years with Jimmy Garoppolo, traded away 3 first-round picks because he knew he had to get better at quarterback. Obviously, they missed on that, and we'll see what Purdy turns into. But if they decide to pay Tua like he's excellent, then you don't get graded on that curve anymore. You have decided that's your guy. I wouldn't pay him. I flatly would not pay him because I don't think the Dolphins are good enough with the stacked team because of the limitations defensively and of Tua. If all of a sudden you have to lose Tyreek or Waddle, one of the two, because you paid Tua down the road, then I certainly don't think they'll be good enough.
Nick Wright, first things first. Good seeing you as always, buddy. Hi, everybody. It's me, Uncle Colin. Subscribe here to get the latest from the herd, including exclusive behind-the-scenes videos and more, wherever you may be, however you may be watching. Thanks again for making us part of your day.